Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon area. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as a unique, one-of-a-kind individual, and about whatever it is we've decided to talk about. I did it again. I was complaining earlier on before the camera started rolling.
Yes, you did.
I always blow my opening. Well, I just did it again. Thank you. My record is intact.
I'm glad your record is intact.
The title of this evening's show is The Evolution of Energy in the 21st Century. And that's a mouthful of something for my thinking. The evolution of energy in the 21st century. And I thought, what is he going to have here? Jack Kerfoot?
Yes, Don.
How are you feeling?
I'm very well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm nervous. Are you nervous?
I'm fine.
I hate you. When people say they're fine and I'm nervous, and I'm always nervous. 17 years of it, and I'm nervous too.
All right.
I know Jack from the health club, or the gym, and he's a regular there, and there's stories about him in the health club and why he's there and what he does. And we won't go into that because we can go on for hours and hours. Because he's very conversant in almost everything and very interesting. And I doubt there's ever a wasted word or thought in your whole vocabulary, because when you say something, I'm obliged to listen carefully, even if it's just passing time.
Okay. You're very kind.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think, we've talked, my career, 40-year career, has been in the energy industry.
Mm-hmm.
And the specific areas that I'd like to talk about is not only just changing energy, the energy industry as a whole, how it's changing. And it's changing dramatically, both in the types of fuels, the power grid system that we have, not only in the United States, but across the world. But I'd like to actually start more in a local focus.
But let's don't start that until we get through the bio segment.
All right, that's fine. Okay.
Yes. Each Conversations with Dr. Don show consists of 2 major segments. In the first segment, the Who Are You segment, I talk with my guests a little about who they are personally so that we might get a bit of an appreciation of why they say what they say. In the second segment, we'll talk about evolution of energy in the 21st century. And I'm looking forward to the second half, but we'll get through the first half.
All right.
But you're an interesting person on your own right without whatever you decided to talk about.
Right. Well, would you like for me to discuss my background?
We're going to get to that in the bio segment. All right. If I were to ask your best friend, who is Jack, what would your best friend say? Be your best friend. Jack is what or who?
I'm very intense and I'm very focused.
Oh, you're the first person. Be your best friend. Jack is?
Very intense.
Yeah, yes, you are.
And very focused.
Yes, and you're that too. Okay, I can verify that.
Okay.
Yeah. And when and where were you born?
I was born in Shawnee, Oklahoma. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1949.
Uh-huh.
And Oklahoma at the time, where I grew up in Tulsa, was the old oil capital of the United States.
Uh-huh.
And the 60s, and then it shifted down to where it is today in Houston, Texas.
Uh-huh. As you know, I've got 1 or 2 trick questions I always ask my guests.
Mm-hmm.
You're familiar with, and he's been on before, Jack has,
Yes.
That's why he's on again. Why were you born?
I am a baby boomer. My father returned from the Second World War, and I have a sister, and I'm sure, or I was told, they wanted to have a brother, so that's why I'm here.
Son of a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, decisions, huh? And anything significant other than being an Oklahoman about your racial, national, or cultural heritage that might be of interest to the viewers?
Well, my grandfather went in the 1880s from Kentucky to Oklahoma and participated in a land run into what was then Indian Territory. And he made, that's the term, the Sooners and the Boomers. The Sooners were the ones that lined up with the military when they fired the cannons, and they went out by horse or by wagon and staked out claims of land. And he staked out a claim of land in the area what is now Shawnee, Oklahoma, in northeastern Oklahoma, settled that area. And my father then grew up there, and then ultimately my father got into the aircraft industry, and that's why we ended up in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Because there was aircraft production there.
McDonnell and Douglas, yes, there was.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That's an earlier career of mine, many, many years ago, too far back to remember. And do you have a religious preference? So by the way, I forgot to mention, if I ask you a question that you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer, of course.
Dr. Don, if there's a question I don't want to answer, I can assure you I won't answer it.
I know you won't.
Okay. But as to religious preference, I am a Christian. I'm a member of Portland Christian Center in Portland. My wife and I joined there in 2013.
Yeah, and that's useful for you.
Absolutely. My wife and I both also are active in or participate in Bible study fellowship in the Lake Oswego and the Beaverton area. So we find that very fulfilling.
Good. I'm a humanist, and I find that very fulfilling too.
That's good.
I'm a recovering Roman Catholic, as I told you, you know. So, and how about your formal education? Talk about that for a bit.
I have a Bachelor of Science and equivalent of a Master's in Geophysics and Geology from the University of Oklahoma. I started law school in Oklahoma City, but then I was transferred to Calgary, so I didn't complete that. And then I've attended business, executive management business program at Penn State University.
You like to learn a lot, don't you?
I have a lot. There's a lot that I don't know, so yes, learning is very important to me. Education is very important to me.
Any comment about other education other than formal education that comes to mind now?
The thing I would say is because in my career I've spent over 20 years overseas, it's been a tremendous education to live in other countries and to meet people with different cultures, religious beliefs, and to understand the diversity in this world, and also to appreciate how fortunate we are to live in this country.
Yes, 20 years. How many other languages do you speak?
Dr. Donald, linguistics is not one of my strengths. A story I like to tell on myself is I was working in Turkey, and the Turkish dialect is a very difficult language, but I was flying in there for 5 or 6 weeks at a time, and then I have to fly back to Houston and I'd come back. But I thought I should learn a few words of the Turkish language. So during the day, when I was at the office for lunch, I'd just walk across the street to this little restaurant, small little restaurant, cafe. And fortunately, they had all the items with little pictures beside it, and I would point to it, and it would come out, and then they would bring me the bill in Turkish lira, and I'd pay it and walk away. So one day in November, it was quite cold and snow on the ground, I thought I'd try my Turkish lessons.
This is in Ankara.
This is in Ankara, that is correct. And so I thought I said, "May I have the bill, please," after I completed my lunch. And the two gentlemen that ran the cafe, sort of eyes wide open, one of them held up a finger, says, shut out the door in the snow. And instead of the bill coming in just a few seconds like normally it did, 30 minutes later, he returned with a bowl of ice cream. So, of course, to be polite, I ate the ice cream, and then I went back to my sign language. So linguistics is not one of my strengths.
That's a good story. Okay. You got any more?
Quite a few, but...
I'll bet you do. So that's an education for you, and boy, I bet you got a ton of stories, all the places you've been. I envy you for that.
I've been very fortunate to have travel.
So we talked just a few words about what you do for a living and what you've done for over 20 years. Will you say a few more words about that before we get into the main questioning and answering about what you do?
Well, again, the technical background was in geophysics, and I actually started in the industry working on a service company on a seismic crew, working in central Texas, in a town called Mejia, Texas, and then places like in Wyoming and also in West Virginia. But then when I went to university and finished university, I started work for Mobil Oil in Denver, and then worked for majors and independents and Denver, and then Midland, Texas, and Oklahoma City, and Calgary, and then Borneo, East Kalimantan, Balikpapan, Indonesia, and then back to Houston, and then to London, and then to Indonesia, and then to Holland, and then back to Lafayette, Louisiana, and then to New Orleans, and then to Houston, and then a few other places along the way. And in each case, the niche, if I say I developed a niche, it was startups and turnarounds. I've worked for 9, 10 different companies in my career, and what I really enjoy is the challenge to try and understand the technical side, but also the commercial side.
Startups and turnarounds. What do you mean by that?
When a company is struggling, then what you're trying to do is to turn it around, solve the problems that they're faced with. In the case of Turkey, it was the case they had 3 fatalities on their seismic operations, which is inexcusable, so they needed to improve the safety standards, and on a technical side, the data that they'd been spent $25 million acquiring data had not been processed properly, and so we had no data. So it was the company I was with was about to be removed either by the government for safety reasons or by our partners because of technical reasons. So I was fortunate to work with some really good people to correct the problems from a safety standpoint and to correct the problems on the technical standpoint. And it's very invigorating when you can do that because it impacts people's lives. And and in each case you're overseas, your responsibility is to train your replacement, and because you're creating jobs for the local economy. So when you have a success like that, it means people have jobs and job security, and they can feed their families. And particularly in developing countries, it's a life and death decision.
Was this career choice, the direction you headed in, was that a deliberate choice, or did you stumble upon it?
I would say it's a little bit of both. The passion for international was always there. And I stumbled upon it in the fact that I realized that I could understand the business sector, business aspect of the technical work of oil and gas exploration, which, strangely enough, although it's not very complex, is something that not many people have a good understanding of. So with that, those two, then that's basically how I went into that career path. And so typically I would be approached quite frequently by companies that needed someone to either help them in a startup operation or a turnaround operation, both large multinationals or smaller dynamic companies.
So you work across the whole spectrum about how big and how small companies or how corporations are.
Absolutely. I've worked for small independents that might have been maybe a market capitalization of $1 billion, and I've worked for companies with a market capitalization of $350, $400 billion.
Any company ever been unhappy with the work you did for them?
I don't think so.
I told you I've got trick questions.
No, that's fine.
Of course
I don't think so. They kept asking me that, but you do the best you can, and then as long as I do the best I can, and that's all that matters.
You're going to change careers along the way now?
Well, I am writing a book, and so yes, I am writing a book.
Will you say a few words about it?
The book is entitled, well, actually, I have a cheat sheet, so yes, it wasn't a surprise. The book is entitled, if I can get the right camera angle, Fueling America in Turbulent Times. Yeah, you've got a better shot there. And it's about my 40-year career in the energy industry, traveling around the world. And more importantly, at the end of each chapter, every 2 or 3 years in the career that I have, it talks about the changes in the energy industry, not just oil and gas, but for instance, the growth of nuclear energy and how people thought nuclear was going to be the perfect solution for energy in North America and the world. There was even a book written in 1948 that talked about by the 21st century, everyone will have an automobile or a vehicle which will be powered by a nuclear reactor. Okay, and the homes will have nuclear power in each of the homes as well.
Nobody thought about waste, or nuclear waste.
Well, there were a lot of things, and that's typically what you have, is that you start with something, and that's science. You know, you come with a model, you come with an idea, and then as you get further down, you find that there are surprises. And so, just as we have now with petroleum, we start to see the impact of coal and the pollution that we see in different areas of the world. And we have people that are concerned, and I'm one of those, about global warming. and the impact of the carbon footprint on the world and what that will do to our climate. So now we're starting to learn that, and the question is, how do we then move to other types of energy that is both reliable, sustainable, cost-effective, and also will not harm our environment.
You have a partner, a boyfriend, a girlfriend?
I have a wife
mate,
who's been married 39 years.
39 years?
39 years, that's right.
And she put up with you all these years?
Yes, she has. Surprising. There are many people that would say, surprising as it is, she has, indeed.
You want to say hello to her?
Oh, well, Barbara,
There
good evening, dear. I'm sure you'll see this very shortly. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here tonight.
Too bad, too bad. I'd like to meet this lady who's spent all this time with you, and wondering how she appreciates your mind and how it works, and just admire your intellect.
Well, I'm not sure that she would say she admires the intellect at times, but she's put up with me. She's been very a wonderful friend and wife for 39 years, and November of next year will be our 40th anniversary.
Wonderful, wonderful. How about children or grandchildren? You got any of those?
No children. We just have a cat. That's all we have. So it's just my wife and myself.
A cat?
Yes.
Male or female?
It's neutered, so it is a male.
Yeah.
From the animal shelter.
You got any stories about this cat?
No, this one, no. Some of the previous ones in our overseas travels, indeed, quite a few, in fact. Okay.
Political persuasion. Do you see yourself as left, right, center, or how would you characterize your political persuasion? Or do you see yourself as having one?
I've been a proponent for both progressive and on a few conservative issues, particularly on fiscal budget. Although with the current president, who would be somewhat considered conservative, fiscal issues don't seem to be part of the policy, so I'm not sure how that plays out. But a bit of both. In each case, I try and vote on the issues at hand. And that's one of the driving factors of my interest on writing the book on energy, is to inform people and broaden the people's understanding on energy. In my mind, energy is a frequently discussed but very poorly understood topic. And I think it's imperative that we help educate and inform people on the issues and the changes that we're seeing in the global energy sector, so that people can make the right decisions and understand the issues that we're faced with. And
as you chatted about this off and on in the gym, because we see each other during the week a lot, I suggest, from what I know about you, it's going to be a big seller. It's going to go over very well.
Well, you're very kind. The important thing is that we can talk about energy. And to me, energy is not a progressive or a conservative or a Democrat or a liberal. It's about what's best for this country.
Yes.
So.
And memberships in political, social, or civic organizations, you hold any memberships like that?
No, not really.
Okay. And persons from the past or alive today, any names come to mind, people you admire or look up to?
Well, as a Christian, of course, the first thing you come to mind is Jesus Christ.
Me too on that.
And then if we talk about politicians and people in this world who've had a significant impact, you would have to look at great leaders of the world and people who've made a major change in their country or the world, whether it be Gandhi, whether it be Martin Luther King, whether it be Abraham Lincoln, whether it be Winston Churchill. Those would, if someone asked me if I could go back in time and spend an evening and talking with someone, those would be some of the first people who would come to my mind.
Occasionally somebody will surprise me and come up with a name I hadn't thought of before, and this has happened a few years ago. Like Jimmy Carter. I've had a number of people out of the blue saying, Jimmy Carter is quite a human being.
Yes, indeed. He's certainly a person that's had a very full life and has accomplished much. I campaigned for him many years ago when I was in Denver, yes. I was a bit disappointed with some of the outcome of his presidency, but I think he's probably a very kind and certainly a Christian man that always tried to do the very best for what he thought was for this country.
I've admired him. As the years have gone by, I appreciate more. As I look at the leaders we've had in succeeding generations and presidencies, How do you see the mainstream media? Is it generally left, right, or centrist, or what?
Well,
partisan, too partisan?
I think the way I'd look at media, quite candidly, is it reminds me of perhaps how newspapers were sold 200 years ago, where the little newspaper boy, usually in those days, the newspaper boy would be out screaming the headlines in the newspaper.
Wokster, read all about it.
And each time the objective was to sell the newspaper. And I think that's what we've gotten into now, especially with 24 hours a day, 7 days a week news. How do you keep the attention of your audience that you can then get support from advertisers so you can stay in business from that standpoint? And so I think that we have tended to go down the path of sensationalizing news. One story that I'll always remember is when, at the time, my wife and I were living in Malaysia, when the United States invaded Iraq. And 2 or 3 days after the invasion, there was a very peaceful demonstration outside the U.S. Embassy of about 40 people demonstrating about the U.S. invasion into Iraq. Now, with those 40 people were about 50 to 60 Malaysian police and 200 Malaysian military. So the potential threat of anything getting out of hand was non-existent. And actually, I was out running in the evening when they had their demonstration, so I can say firsthand there was no violence whatsoever. It was a very peaceful and orderly demonstration. The next night, my wife's parents called from Canada, wanting to know if we were going to be evacuated from Malaysia. Apparently, CNN had put on the news a film clip showing rioting and said it was in Kuala Lumpur. I think they got the film clip perhaps from Islamabad in Pakistan or from some other area in the world, but they decided that Malaysia, Pakistan, it's over there somewhere. Let's put the pictures of the rioting out there so we can get people's attention to that. But there was no violence whatsoever, and we felt perfectly safe our entire time living in Malaysia. It's a beautiful country, and I have only the highest regard for the people there.
It's amazing what that industry or that business will do to earn its keep or to make a living or a profit.
Unfortunately, sometimes the bottom line causes people to make questionable decisions.
What's most important nowadays? 2 or 3 things most important to pay attention to for us as Americans. What's most important nowadays?
Well, the question, I think the most important question, I would say, is common ground. We may have different opinions. There's not a unified position for the Democrats. There's not a unified position for the Republicans.
Sad.
But that's always been the case. If you look at what the Democratic Party has supported, it has a party of many different platforms with a diversity of people with different positions, and they seek common ground to support a candidate for the agenda that their party has. The same can be said for the Republicans. So I think the thing we have to do is to recognize we have to show common ground and respect to everybody, regardless of their opinion, and look for common ground to achieve good things, such as how does Oregon develop a plan for energy in the future.
Yeah. So then, from what I'm hearing, what's been going on for some 20 or 30 years, or even more, the two parties are not as effective as they need to be. Is it likely that we will eventually have an alternative to these two parties?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. The extreme case is if we can look at India, where they have 148 different parties.
Wait a minute now.
There is that question about the growing impact of alternative parties, such as the Green Party. It'll be interesting to see if that happens, and it will be interesting to see if the addition of more parties will result in more effective legislation. Of course, I always recall back to President Johnson, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who has the record as a president who passed more legislation in 6 years than any other president before or after him. And that was because he had the experience as the majority leader in the Senate of understanding how to work and build a consensus on the key topics and the issues.
And he knew how to twist arms.
He did know how to twist arms very effectively. That's exactly right.
Well, let's leave this segment for the time being, take a break, then we'll come back and talk about the subject. We're back, and thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people, like most of you out there, about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is we've decided to talk about tonight. We're talking about the evolution of energy in the 21st century, and so far it's been very fun talking to you about who you are. Now let's talk about what we're about.
Very good.
Okay.
Well, Dr. Don, the question that I'd like to put out to discuss initially is, Oregon has an energy vision, but does the state have a plan? In March of 2016, the Oregon Governor, Kate Brown, signed Senate Bill 1547, which was hailed as visionary legislation, energy visionary legislation. The bill requires the state's two largest utilities, Portland General Electric and Pacific Power, to stop buying out-of-state coal by 2030. While our legislatures are congratulating themselves, I would say not so fast. The question is, that's a vision, but how do we fill the gap of that, as well as the gap for our increasing demands for energy?
A vision is one thing, and actually putting that vision to work.
That's exactly right. And one reason I'm concerned is there are cases, and in fact there's a very good case in Southern Australia. The state of Southern Australia decided that they were going to push ahead with a very aggressive renewable energy program. And so they stopped all coal and basically went to wind power for over 75% of their energy. But they didn't have any redundant or backup energy. So what happened was they achieved the dubious record of having the highest electric bills in the world. Effectively, the electricity costs in Southern Australia are 5, 6, and potentially 7 times more than we pay in Oregon.
That's incredible.
And on top of that, they had electrical power 6 days a week, because the wind doesn't always blow. Unfortunately, weather is not always cooperative. And so they didn't have sufficient battery storage and alternative power sources to provide energy to the homes, the schools, and the hospitals. So they had to come up with emergency energy requirements filled by offsetting states. Now, Tesla has just in the process of field testing the largest battery pack for Southern Australia to help the renewable energy.
Tesla, the company that makes this exotic machine, car.
Cars, they also do solar panels, they also do batteries as well. Elon Musk, exactly. And he actually put a challenge out there to himself and said, we can build this in 90 days, and if we don't, then we will build it for free.
90 days.
And so he achieved that goal. So that's a lesson going too far or going down a path without a plan. It's important to realize that right in 2017, 33% of the electricity in Oregon comes from coal, and that's according to Oregon.com. Now, on top of that loss of power from coal, the state is also experiencing rapid growth. In 2015, the population of the state was about 4 million people. Projections by Portland State and University of Portland say 1.5% population growth over the next till 2030. Now, the reason 2030 is important, that's the date when we have to, the state has mandated we stop using coal energy. So if you take a 1.4% population growth from where we are in 2015 and project that into 2030, That means by 2030, our population is going to be 5 million people.
Oh, that's a big jump.
It is a big jump, and those people also need energy. And on top of that, one of the industries that we're trying to encourage to move to Oregon is the information technology, including the data management of the data farms. Those data farms require significant amount of energy to maintain the cooling potential in their storage systems.
Will you say a couple of words about data farm?
Data farms. Basically like the cloud systems that they have where people store their data, whether it's Google or Yahoo. Quite a few, Amazon, Alphabet, have all of these data farms that are out there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And on top of that, we're starting to see a very rapid move toward electronic vehicles. Now, electronic vehicles will basically, the significant aspect of that is you're going to shift, when the more and more electronic vehicles you have, you're basically abandoning the refineries, which generate gasoline and diesel, and you're putting that demand for power onto your utilities. So when you look at the loss of power from the coal and the projected increase from the population just from the homes, and then put in there a very conservative amount of increase of power from electronic vehicles, and also a minimal increase from businesses. Basically, I see that we've got a 47% shortfall in energy by the year 2030 if we're using these numbers. That means, to put it in a different perspective, 2.9 million people in the state would not have power. That's correct.
You got some
Okay.
fantastic idea.
I hope, first of all, I'd like to convince you that this is a serious problem that needs to be discussed.
Uh-huh.
Now, the legislators right now, the Oregon legislatures, are talking about a carbon tax, relegating fossil fuel to the same type of category as tobacco, carbonated beverages, and alcohol. And a carbon tax, actually, the advantage is, unfortunately, the only time people conserve energy is when it becomes expensive. So from that standpoint, that's good. But the impact on the conservation might be 1% impact on energy conservation of people in the homes. But it's not going to offset the loss of power, and it's not going to offset the needs for a growing state. Some people in the state legislators, and I believe the governor in particular, are advocates of following California's lead in emphasizing solar. Well, that's fine, except for one factor, and that is Southern California and Oregon have very different climates.
Yes.
To be exact, we have less than half as many sunny days in Portland as they do in some place like Los Angeles.
It's been kind of different lately here in Portland.
Yes, but even then, in Southern California, only 9% of the electrical power is generated by solar. So I don't even see solar, even if we had as much sun as Southern California, as being able to fill that gap for Oregon by 2030. It's only 12 years away.
Yeah.
So to perhaps be a bit harsh, I would say our Oregon legislators are studying for the wrong test because Oregon is not California. Well, what we have to do is look at the resources that we do have. And to looking at the resources and how do we fill that gap, I think it's important to start with what it provides our power today. And today, 43% of all electrical power is from hydro.
Here in Oregon.
Here in Oregon. We have, I believe, the fourth most amount of renewable energy for electrical power generation of any state in the United States. 34% is coal, natural gas is 14%, wind is 5%, nuclear is 3%, and then there's 1% of different odds and ends, including biomass. So the first thing we have to say is, let's take a look at hydro. Well, hydroelectric is the cleanest energy there is. There's absolutely no pollution and no carbon footprint at all. It's also cost competitive as far as an energy source with natural gas, which is right now the cheapest fuel out there. The problem is we seem, as a state legislator, seem to be putting more and more restrictions to slow down or even reverse the trend of putting hydroelectric facilities on our rivers. And the arguments are, and these are true, absolutely true, that basically by putting a dam on a river for electric power, you are going to destroy an ecosystem,
Yeah.
okay, of the river system.
Mm-hmm.
And you will also basically limit the amount of some sports fishing for those that like fly fishing in the rivers and those that like canoeing or kayaking. That is not something that they support. Okay. However, the question is, what is more important? Keeping the lights on in our homes, in our hospitals, in our schools, or special interest groups from that standpoint? There's no energy that we can choose that doesn't have advantages and disadvantages. Fossil fuel, coal, oil, natural gas, they pollute, but they're also inexpensive, okay? So the question is, do you want to continue the cheap energy, or do you want to go down the path of looking for something that's renewable? The other factor that I always like to bring out when we talk about fossil fuel, people will argue, well, look, it's cheap, it's the cheapest fuel out there and we have abundant energy in the United States. Well, right now we do. But fossil fuel is not renewable. And at some point in time, we will run out. And we'll either run out from an economic reason or we will literally run out from the amount of hydrocarbons or coal that we can extract. There was an article published 15 years ago by a research physicist out of Royal Dutch Shell that said we would have already run out of producible economic oil by 1996. Now, he missed the mark on that one, but his theory was basically every area in the world you have a ramp up in production of oil and you reach a peak and then you go in a decline. So he was extrapolating that out. So at some point in time, we will run out of fossil fuel. So we need to start preparing for it now, in addition to the fact that all the overwhelming majority of the scientists out there today believe that the carbon footprint created by man and industrial businesses and our cars and our homes contribute to global warming.
Is there an estimate as to when, 15, 20, 30 years from now, that we'll be needing to get away to make up for the loss of energy from coal?
Well, the problem with, there are 4 types of coal, and the highest quality coal, anthracite, has effectively been mined out across the world. There's very little of that. And so as we move down the next 3 tiers of coal, what happens is that the energy generated from that coal decreases. So therefore it takes more and more of that energy of the poor quality coal to burn to generate the same amount of power as the higher quality coal, which basically means you generate more pollution, okay?
Sure.
So we can go down that path, okay, but then effectively we're creating more and more energy and basically we reach the end much sooner than we, from that standpoint. So to me, we don't need to look at what California has. What we need to do is look at what does Oregon have, okay?
Sure.
And we have an abundance of 3 types of renewable energy. One is hydroelectric, and we can continue to push and encourage through our legislatures the development of hydroelectric power in the state.
From the rivers?
From the rivers, absolutely. And the other 2 are geothermal and wind, offshore wind in particular. From a geothermal standpoint,
we have a lot of that in Oregon?
the states, according to the United States Geological Survey, the states with the 3 greatest geothermal potential are Nevada, Oregon, and Idaho. Now what's interesting is, the question is, how significant is it? Well, the largest geothermal plant in the world is in an area north of Santa Rosa near a town called Cloverdale, the geysers plant. And when I was in university in the 70s, in the late 70s, I worked there. And at the time, the steam, they basically drill down into the rock and the steam would come up and they would put the steam into the pipes. Pipes would turn the turbines and then they would re-inject the water back into the ground. So effectively it was a very perfect energy system. But in the 70s, the geothermal plant was providing 80% of all the electrical power for the entire Bay Area.
Wow, geothermal.
Geothermal. Now what's interesting, if you look at where much of that geothermal potential is, it is in eastern Oregon. Now, one of the representative from Eastern Oregon is always concerned about how do we create jobs in an area in Eastern Oregon because their economy is suffering compared to Western Oregon.
Yes.
Geothermal is the perfect answer. Not only can it provide cost-effective renewable energy for the entire state, it can provide jobs for Eastern Oregon as well.
Yeah, which
Okay.
they need.
Which they absolutely need. Now the next is wind, and that's the last one. Now we do have wind farms on shore. However, what I'm talking about is wind farms offshore. Right now there are 26 offshore wind farms in the world. They are in Western Europe. There are 10 in the United Kingdom, 10 in Germany, 3 in Denmark, 2 in Belgium, and 1 in the Netherlands. Now, why offshore? Well, the reason is the winds offshore are stronger and more intense than they are onshore. The mountains break up
Because
the
of the
winds.
flat, yeah.
That's exactly right.
Mhm.
Now, what I've seen as far as cost and the technology over the past 9 years in wind technology and the wind turbines has really driven the cost for electricity from wind down significantly. But this year, in fact, a offshore wind farm off the coast of Scotland bid a cost for electricity that was only 1 cent per kilowatt hour more than what we're paying in Oregon right now. That's about a 10% cost increase over your electrical bill right now. So that's something that's very manageable from a
When are
cost.
we going to do that here in Oregon?
Well, that's the key question. Now, there is one offshore wind farm currently being built in Rhode Island, and the states of New York and New Jersey are aggressively pursuing offshore wind right now. California has a plan for an offshore wind program, but it's moving at a slower pace because they continue to focus on solar. But my question is, why doesn't Oregon have a wind energy plan? Now, the reason I really raised this question is the areas in the United States that have by far the strongest and most intense winds are Northern California and Oregon. Now, the wind speed is important because when you have a wind of 14 miles an hour versus a wind of 16 miles an hour, just a 2-mile-an-hour increase in wind speed with the turbines today can generate 50% more electrical power.
That's incredible, just 2 miles an hour.
Just 2 miles an hour. And the wind speeds that you have, again, this is from NASA and from the U.S. Energy Information Agency, that we have off of Oregon run between 5 and 7 miles per hour at higher speeds than what they have off of New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island. So the offshore wind energy potential is very significant. Now, one of the first questions people ask is, well, yes, but it'll hurt the marine life. Actually not. If you look in the Gulf of Mexico, the offshore oil platforms have actually been proven by numerous studies, federal studies, that it's actually helped the fish population and the ecosystem offshore because it creates many reefs out there from that standpoint.
Really?
And there's no problem whatsoever with migratory species that they have. Now, you would still do the study to confirm that, the optimum location. But there is absolutely no negative impact that should occur from an offshore wind farm. In fact, probably the greatest pollution that you would have from anything offshore right now would be from tankers that come into the ports or sail up and down the coast that have a very bad habit, especially foreign tankers, of flushing their bilge tanks and dumping water onto the water from that standpoint. But as far as a carbon footprint, the wind would have virtually none. It could be a huge source of power for particularly the west coast of Oregon, where most of our population is, and it could be supplemented with geothermal as well as hydroelectric. Now, the reason I'm pushing to get everyone's attention now is you can't build an offshore wind farm in 6 months or 1 year. It takes quite a few years,
Of course.
permitting, environmental studies, to go through the whole process. So to reach that electricity gap that we have 12 years from now, we have to start now.
That's intriguing. So how, it's a diversionary question here.
Mhm.
There's the wind farms, and they have to get the energy to the land where people can use it, right?
Cables, that's it. There's a small amount of transmission loss, but it's minimal.
Okay.
And they can actually lay the cables well over 200 miles offshore. Now, as far as weather is concerned, the North Sea weather is far more treacherous and difficult, and as far as storms are concerned, than what you have on the West Coast. And realize, too, that structures built in the Gulf of Mexico have to endure 3 to 4 major hurricanes a year in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
So the technology for building the structures is there. There's no, in my mind, there's no significant or no real environmental risk from that. And the upside is we can shift from fossil fuel to be renewable and be 100% renewable if we move forward.
Shift from fossil fuels to
renewable. That's right.
And renewable meaning, in this case for Oregon, a lot of it would be coming from wind farms.
Wind farms, more wind farms, offshore wind farms, geothermal, and more expansion in hydroelectric.
And if we don't do any of those things you're talking about?
Be prepared to turn off the lights.
I would like to think of a question, but I have the answer before I ask it.
Well, it's one thing to turn on, it's one thing to say, the key issue is, and this is sometimes the pitfall that we fall into in the discussion about energy, is we don't want this, we don't want this. But every time that you restrict or limit a type of energy, then you have to ask the question is, fine, but what will you fill the gap with? Okay? How will we meet this energy demand from a growing population? The United States is the only developed country that has a growing population. And as our population continues to grow, primarily from immigrants, there are more demands for energy. So the question is, how are we going to meet those energy demands? And what we don't want to do is end up with the pollution of toxic proportion that we see in other places around the world.
So other countries around the globe are more successful in getting ahead of the game as far as meeting their energy requirements in the future?
Well, the answer to some would be yes. I'll let you hold up a few of these.
Sure.
First one is a picture of Beijing taken in 2015. That building, by the way, is over 500 feet tall. So that's the pollution. And if you actually look at the 32 largest cities in the People's Republic of China, the World Bank would characterize the air quality as toxic. Now, that's Beijing, the capital, and here's Shanghai.
Well, all the buildings and people, just some very tall ones, huh?
That's right. Well, that's why you have many people who come over from China on their airplane and visit the United States, wear the little surgical masks because they're used to poor air quality. Now let's go to another part of the world. Here's Egypt, just outside of the pyramids. Not known for their industrialization, but clearly pollution.
In Egypt? Well, they're not industrial. Why are they being so polluted?
Okay. And here we go with Tehran in the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's actually one of the clearer days. Okay.
Wow, you see nothing but that darn minaret or whatever that is?
Yeah. And here we go in Delhi. This was just taken actually in Delhi. They actually had to cancel a cricket match, the sport of cricket, because the pollution was so thick they couldn't even see the ball coming toward the wickets.
That looks like an Eiffel Tower behind there.
Well, that's just one of the taller buildings that they have.
Okay.
And from that standpoint. And it's okay to say, well, those countries have a problem, but we all share the same atmosphere. And we can go to large cities and other areas in Africa and South America, down in Rio and Rio de Janeiro. We can go to places like Athens, Ankara, Turkey, Eastern Europe, have these similar problems. Now, the thing about Beijing, I was actually in Beijing in 1983, and it was just after
a while ago.
It was a while ago, and the country had just opened up. And decided to go for a run that morning before our tour started. And so I went out on the road, and I thought I was running in a fog. I quickly realized it was not fog, it was smog. And it was smog because although there were no cars in the city in 1983, they used sulfur coal. And so they were carrying around sulfur coal in little carts by hand. Well, today there are 5.5 million cars in Beijing, and China is the largest consumer and producer of coal in the world. Okay, and so the top 32 cities, the 32 largest cities in China, the World Bank would characterize the air quality as toxic.
Are we having climate change on the globe?
Well, that's a good question, because I get into I have a energy group on Facebook, and one of the topics, what I'm always reminded by my fellow earth scientists, that if you look back in geologic time, there have been periods of climate changes 56 million years ago in what we would characterize, geologists characterize as the Paleocene, Eocene. The Earth's temperature is estimated to be 73 degrees Fahrenheit. That's average across the world. And that's basically looking at the fossil record and looking at the type of fossil that's there. Now, the average temperature in the world today is 60 degrees. There's also periods of the Ice Age. The last major Ice Age was 13,000 years ago, and it was estimated the average temperature were only 9 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. So we've had historically, as far as the Earth's history of 4.5, 4.8 billion years, dramatic changes in temperatures going up and temperatures going down, okay?
Are we influencing that?
Well, that's the question. Now, the NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, who I think you've worked for, has documented
We got about 3 or 4 minutes left.
is increased by 1.7 degrees since 1880. And because of the melting ice caps, the sea level has increased by 3.4 millimeters. I would argue the evidence clearly supports that we are experiencing, man has causing a climate increase or a temperature increase or climate change. Can we say that absolutely? No. Okay.
Of course not.
Because science is not exact. Science is only an estimate based on the data you have. But the overwhelming population of the scientific community would say that yes, we are experiencing climate change caused by man and industrialization.
So the present administration in Washington suggests that there is no such thing as global warming or climate change. I don't want to get political on you, but I had to ask you that.
Well, you have to ask me that question. And my comment would be there's still people that believe the world is flat. And so I would say that because I'm trying to be a person that respects all opinions, the President of the United States is entitled to his opinion, but the compelling scientific evidence would say that is not a supported opinion.
One more question, completely off the bat. You mentioned running 2 or 3 times. You've been running for a long time.
I'm an old runner. That's exactly right.
You say a few words about you marathons and.
Well, one reason that we decided to move to Oregon is Oregon has a history and a proud history of people being outdoors and liking running, and this is probably one reason I'm so concerned about air quality. So have I done marathons? Yes, I've participated in a few, and also triathlons. But when you run outside, you enjoy the beauty of nature, and it's something that we can't waste.
Did you ever get into a runner's high?
I'm not sure I fully understand what the runner's high is. I just enjoy doing it. But I would make one final comment about climate change.
Please.
And that is this. No one talked about icebergs until there was the Titanic.
Didn't you have some information about for the viewers to see?
The webpage I have, where I do a blog and podcasts, is right there, www.jackkerfoot.com. And I also have a Facebook energy group, which is Energy Solutions or Catastrophe. So if you just go to simply my Facebook page at Jack Kerfoot, then you can access and join my group. We have about 1,500 members from around the world, Australia, Asia, Africa, Europe, South America, and North America. And we have good discussions, points and counterpoints on different energy topics from around the world.
Wow, and what's that last one?
Well, that's just the name of the book again that I'm working on.
Yes.
Fueling America in Turbulent Times. And I think that we are in turbulent times and have gone through turbulent times. Starting in 1973, with the first oil embargo and then different periods of time where we've seen dramatic ramps of oil price increases and energy shortages.
Now, you got to say something to the viewers. One final thought about anything we've talked about, anything else comes to mind. So look at that
All right.
and tell the viewers any thoughts you have right now.
My thoughts are this. Oregon has a energy vision, but do we have a plan? It's incumbent on everyone who's a voter to write their legislatures and encourage their elected officials to support a renewable energy plan that starts not in 2030, but in 2017 and soon 2018. Let's look at the resources we have. Let's look at hydroelectric, let's look at offshore wind farms, and let's look at geothermal and remove fossil fuel from the equation to keep our power on.
Yay! It's time for us to stop now, so we have a PSA or two, one or two that we can put up on the screen here. Public service announcements, I always like to have a few of those to tell people what I think is important.
Okay.
And to get my local broadcast schedule for my show, go to my website and click on present day activities, and you're going to have the ACO. Watch my shows on the web, Google Don Baham YouTube. You can see a bunch of shows there. And one more, my favorite, the American Civil Liberties Union. Go to www.aclu.org and learn how we need to protect our civil liberties because they're in danger nowadays. And yeah, public access station. So let's talk about KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. Well, thanks for watching. Remember KFC, here we go. Not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. John's KFC. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable. To you too. And you already are.
Right.
You and you out there. Thanks again for watching, and I enjoyed talking to my guests with you, and we'll see you next time.
Right.